Hey guys, it's Karina with Karina Loves to Plan. Welcome back to my channel. So here I am with another 30 inks 30 days, so soon after September finish. But I thought, you know what, this is a great chance for me to try all the examples that I have in here and to get to use all of my pens once again. So if you're not familiar with how I set up 30 inks 30 days, I have my B6 Galen leather notebook, which the leather on this, and I love how it's wearing down, and you can see all the patina and just where I hang on to it. This has 52 GSM Tomoe River paper. So in here, I keep track of 30 inks 30 days in a grid like this, but then I'll show you a previous 30 inks 30 days. I can show you June. So what I also do is keep track of, days 1 through 8 or 9 through 15, etc. And then I do swatches like this on the other page. And then another place I keep track as well is in my Hobonichi Cousin, where I'm going to keep track in, where did it go? This grid here. And then each page of my journal, I will be doing a little swatch or splotch of each ink, similar to like what I did here, so that I have another place to use that pen and ink combination. And then the last place that I will be using my pen and inks is in my Hobonichi A5 notebook. And this is where I am going to practice some more floral paintings with fountain pen ink, but also transcribing Anne of Green Gables. I'm actually pretty close to the end of this, so I'm thinking the next book will probably be The Hobbit or the next book in the Anne of Green Gables series. But I enjoy doing the flower painting as well as, doing 2 pages of transcribing. It allows me really 3 pages to be able to write and get to know the pen and ink combination. So that is how I am preparing for 30 inks 30 days. But I will let you know that I do not choose the pen and ink combinations randomly. I actually have a spreadsheet all set out with the order that I want to use the pens in and which inks are going to go with which pen. So let's go ahead and get started with days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The stink ink is Vinta Peregrino, which is Pilgrim's Blue, and I'm trying to remember where I got this sample from. It will come to me. But I am putting it in my Zodiac Pen Co. This is the Carolina Agate in the Sagittarius model, and I was just showing that I put a Fude nib on here. And I've been wanting to try this Fude nib for quite a while. Katie actually sent it to me quite a few months ago, and I haven't had an opportunity to put it into a pen, so I thought this was a great way to do that. So I'll put a drop of that onto the first grid on my 30 inks 30 days and then swirl it around with my ink sample vial. I really like doing this because, I don't need perfect circles, but this is a great way to get all of the characters of the ink. So you get the shading, and it's just such a pretty blue. So I'm going to go ahead and write what ink it is, and you can see I'm struggling a little bit with the Fude nib, so it's going to take me a little bit of getting used to for the day that I'm writing it with. And I'm like, what was this again? Pilgrim's Blue. But so far, I love this pen. It's such a pretty resin by Bob Dupress, and Bart of Zodiac Pen Co. did an amazing job with the pen. So the Fude nib was great for laying down that rectangle, and here I am writing down the ink name, but I'm having to write with it at a higher angle to get a finer line, which is a little bit uncomfortable for me. But overall though, I'm still loving the blue. Like, it's such a great blue, and so far the flow of this ink is actually a good average flow. It's a little bit more wet than average, and I think having the Fude nib is also helpful with that as well. I like having the different line widths of the Fude nib, but it's not one I feel like I would write with on an everyday basis. So here in my Hobonichi Cousin, I'm placing a few drops on November 1st because every day in the month of November, I will be using the specific ink for that day to journal with. And I'm using the sandwich bag method of getting the ink swatches because I find this is a great way to show off all of the shading and the sheening and properties of the ink without getting too messy and not needing a lot of expensive materials. And then the next thing I'm going to be doing is in my Hobonichi A5 notebook where I'm transcribing Anne of Green Gables. The other thing I'm doing as well is actually doing a little painting tutorial every day. I'm following different artists on YouTube just to get, a little bit of practice every day. These painting tutorials don't take more than 5 to 10 minutes, and it really, sorry, that's Lucy groaning in the background, but it is more for me to practice my control of the brush, but also to learn more about the property of the ink and how painting with it can show off the different shading. If there's a way that I can lighten the ink to, show off a different bit of shading, but it's definitely different painting with fountain pen ink than it is with watercolor. And I like being able to experiment with that as well as transcribe with it. So I'm actually using a different color here for the stems, and you can see that the more that I do this, the more practice I get in different types of painting I'm doing, I am practicing different ways of holding the brush, but also different levels of control with the paintbrush. So for me, this practice is, twofold. I'm learning different ways to do florals, but also learning different ways of controlling my paintbrush and how to use the color. So there I'm writing what day it is, day 1, with that Fude nib, and it really is a beautiful, beautiful blue. This Vinta ink, I love Vinta inks because it is a Filipino-owned ink company based in the Philippines, and I love being able to support any Filipino small business. So there is the Vinta Peregrino. It's such a gorgeous blue with beautiful shading. And then you see that here in the writing sample, trying to use the different widths of the Fude nib. But again, I don't think this nib is necessarily for me. It was fun, but it's not an everyday writer. And I mean, I love the color of this ink. This ink flowed really well, and I would love to try it in like a fine or an extra fine. But in Fude, it was actually really fun to use as well. Day 2, and we have Ilium tulip moth worm, which again was a weird one for me, but I'm using it in my Pelican M800 brown black with a fine nib. And I was so excited to be using this pen because this was a grail pen of mine, and I filled it as much as I could do and then place a little bit on my grid there. If you're ever going to do 30 inks 30 days, I recommend doing a grid like this so you can see all of the inks in one spot, so you can compare the whole 30 inks in one, well, over one spread like this. So then I'm writing down the ink name, Ilium tulip moth worm. It's such a weird name, but I think I'm coming around to these browns, especially using them in my beautiful, beautiful Pelican M800. This fine nib is a slightly broader fine nib. I'd call it more of a medium, and it's also very wet. So it really brought out the qualities of this ink, and it was such a great, smooth writing experience. It was a really wonderful combination. And then here, as you can see, the Vinta Peregrino did bleed through a little bit, but I actually don't mind that. I know it would bother some people, but with my sandwich bag method, I know that I am going to get some bleed through to other pages, but I almost see that as part of the design and part of the inevitability when I'm going to be swatching inks like this. And I don't mind because it adds just a little bit of something to the inks on a day-to-day basis. But then you could see the shading of this really gorgeous warm brown ink. It's like a comfy brown. So the next thing I'm going to do is then paint in my Hobonichi A5 notebook. And here, I don't even remember what the names of these florals were, but I really just wanted to try different florals and try different pressures and different petals and combinations of the different wetness of the ink, the saturation of the ink, and then adding a little bit of that Peregrino or that Vinta Peregrino blue in there for the stamen inside the flower. But for me, this is just a fun way of experimenting with the ink and finding different ways of using it, because 30 inks 30 days is really what you make of it. If you just want to write a journal entry, great. If you want to paint with it, great. You don't have to do as much as I do. This is me overextending myself, I have to admit. But I'm also driven by a challenge like this. So there I am writing the ink color and then the name, and then you will see here shortly what that ink looks like in my journal. It shades beautifully, but you do see a little bit of the bleed through of the Vinta Peregrino. And then here is the writing sample used or through my Pelican M800 brown black. This brown is such a gorgeous, warm, comfy brown, and I didn't ever think I would say that about browns, but I really like this one. And the flow of this ink was also lovely. So if you are looking for a brown, I really like this Anderillium Tulip Moth Warm. Day 3, we have Private Reserve Spearmint, and I do love a good punchy green, and this is going in my Esterbrook Esty Rainforest, and this has a fine nib, right? Yeah, I think so. And then I'm gonna go ahead and fill that up. And if I haven't said so already, this ink sample vial holder is from Fountain Pendulum, and I will include a link to her YouTube down below in the description. So placing a little dot or drop onto my grid here and swirling it around with a sample ink vial. I like this method because I know I'm not going to get a perfect circle, but I like that. And then I'm going to write the ink name here, Private Reserve Spearmint. It really is a punchy green that matches with this pen so well. And then I'm going to go ahead and write that in my entry here. So there's a few different places that I document this ink, but so far this ink is very, well, I say very wet, but it is wet, just the amount of wetness and flow that I like. And this nib, oh sorry, it's an extra fine nib, super smooth, love this. So then placing a few drops in my Hobonichi Cousin for my daily journal, and once again using the sandwich bag method. I find this method so fun, but it's also quick and easy, and you decorate a journal in like 2 minutes. Super quick, you don't need a lot, you need a sandwich bag, that's all. And then in my Hobonichi A5 notebook, for today's painting, I decided I would try different types of leaves. And this one took me a little bit longer because it required different pressures of the brush, different control with the paintbrush. And it also meant I was experimenting with the saturation of the ink as well. So when I mean saturation, I'm either going to dip my brush directly into the ink and go with its maximum saturation, or once I dip it in the ink, I will add a little bit of water to that so that it turns out a little lighter. So that's part of why I do the painting, is that so I can experiment with that saturation. And you'll see here in other ink colors, for example, ones that have sheen and things like that, by adding that water, it shows off different properties of the ink. And this one, I really like the different types of leaves that I do, and it did require a little bit more time and a little bit more detail, but I do like how it turned out. Somebody did ask me if I was going to turn these into stickers, and I said, no, this is really mostly practice for me and mostly for fun, but this could definitely be something I think about making into stickers in the future. But I highly recommend playing around with fountain pen ink in this way, because if you're not going to use all of your fountain pen ink in your pens, might as well experiment with them in different ways, which is why I like doing this. So here I am then writing the name of the ink before I go ahead and start transcribing. And I do have to say, I really love the Esterbrook Esty model. I find that out of all my pens, it is one of my most comfortable, but also the nibs on these are very smooth, especially for an extra fine nib. The ink in this nib actually works out really well. So you can see here how the pen matches really well with that Private Reserve Spearmint. And in the writing sample, this is an extra fine, but because of the flow of this ink, you know, there's no hard starting. I don't have any issues with it. I think this is a really great combination. So if you're looking for a green that will work well on an extra fine nib, Private Reserve Spearmint is a great one. Day 4, and we have Jacques Herbin Bouquet d'Antan. And oh gosh, I've had so many samples sent to me in the last few months here, and I'm trying to get through them all. And I'm going to put this one in my Just Turnings Pastel Primary Manipulation. Gosh, I love this pen. This pen was purchased completely spontaneously. I woke up one morning and I was scrolling through Instagram when I should have been resting, and then I saw that this has just been posted on Steven's Instagram, and immediately messaged him and said, I want it. I had had a pastel primary manipulation pen before, but it just wasn't exactly right. Whereas this one, just perfect, just exactly what I wanted my pastel primary manipulation to look like. So this particular ink, this Jacques Herbin Bouquet d'Anton, I felt was a little dry in the extra fine nib that was in this pen. It's a very pretty pink, but again, it's also verging on a bit too light and a bit too dry for me. And I found that writing with it wasn't as enjoyable as I would have liked it to be. I mean, it's really great swatching with it with the sandwich bag and also painting with it. Painting with it was actually really fun. I created little kind of cherry well, I guess they're cherry blossoms. They look like cherry blossoms. They're not really, but practicing again a different type of flower petal. Painting with this ink was beautiful and I really enjoyed it for that aspect, but writing with this ink on a day-to-day basis in an extra fine nib, it just felt too dry and too light for me, so it wasn't the most enjoyable experience. If you normally write with an extra fine nib, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this pink for you, but if you want to experiment with it with painting, then yes, go ahead and give this a try. So this one I would recommend more for like medium and broad nibs if that is what you normally write with. And I apologize, my hair is sticking up here. And then, you know, using it for artwork if you so choose. So here you're seeing me play around with the saturation a little bit and play around with a little bit of the wet on dry method and using that with fountain pen ink. And playing around with that method and using a different medium like fountain pen ink is one of the reasons why I am doing this, because I am not a watercolor artist at all, but I have found painting with fountain pen ink so fun, especially on Tomoe River paper. I'm really enjoying the process and learning about the different properties of the inks and what I can do with that as well. So then I'm going to go ahead and write down the name of the ink and what day we're on before I go ahead and start transcribing Anne of Green Gables. And just as an update, I am almost done Anne of Green Gables. I'll probably finish it before the end of 30 Inks 30 days, but just look at this pen. Oh, so pretty. So you can see here in the writing sample at the beginning, it does have quite a bit more saturation, and as it goes, I mean, it'll lighten a little bit the longer that I write with it for, but I don't know, it wasn't the most enjoyable experience for me because it felt dry in this extra fine nib, but that's just me. So that's Herbin Bouquet d'Anton. Day 5, and we have Diamine Lilac Night. Now, I have had this in my stash for quite a while, and I don't know why I've never used it, but I thought it'd be the perfect pairing for my Narwhal Nautilus Voyage in Tromsø. And this was a pen that I'd had issue with maybe about a month or so ago, but I was able to fix it with a wrench that Narwhal had supplied to me. And I wasn't sure if I was actually getting any ink in there, so try my best to be really gentle with the piston mechanism and make sure I still got ink in there. So then placing a drop onto my grid and swirling it around with the sample ink vial. And then I'm going to go ahead and write the name of the ink. And this pen has a fine nib, which is extremely smooth and has a great flow. And I think this ink as well is generally wetter, so I really enjoyed the two together. And plus this dark purple matches really well with the colors of the resin of this pen. And I don't know why I never used it before now, because it really is a gorgeous purple and one that I am tempted to buy a bottle of. Who knew? So Diamine Lilac Night. And one thing I have to say for this Narwhal is that the nib is smooth for a fine nib and it has good flow. So the combination of these two together was one that I thoroughly enjoyed. But like, look at this purple. It's got beautiful coloring and matches so well. So next I'm going to place a few drops of this into my Hobonichi cousin. And I actually really enjoy journaling this way because once you put the ink down on the page and swatch it with a sandwich bag, when you flip the pages of your journal after you've done all this, the sound that the Tomoe River paper makes is amazing. Like if you are an ASMR fan, once you flip through your pages after they've been written in and had ink all over them, it's one of the best sounds in the world. There's just this crunchy
sound that this paper makes once it's been written on, and I absolutely love it. But it also shows the great properties of the ink. So here I'm actually trying to paint lavender, and this is one I think I've tried to do before, but I didn't feel confident enough in doing. So I thought, you know what, this is really great color for it, so I might as well try. And it mostly turned out the way that I wanted it to, but I think with more practice, I'm going to experiment with how this bunch of lavender is going to look. I wanted it to look more like a bouquet, but it kind of just looks like random sprigs of lavender that are just randomly spread out throughout my page. And then writing the name or the day. So what day are we on now? Day 5. And then writing the name of the ink. And to be honest, I really enjoy this one, and I can't believe it's taken me so long. It was kind of like Diamine Earl Grey, an ink that I was interested in, but never I just never put it in my cart and purchased. But look at how beautiful this purple is. It's got great shading, and in a fine nib, it does look darker and it doesn't show as much shading, but I still really enjoy what it looks like. And the writing experience, it's got great flow and a fine nib. Had no issues with this pen and ink pairing, and the way that the ink matches with the pen is gorgeous. So this is one that I may have to buy a bottle of. Who knew? Diamine Lilac Night. Day 6, and we have Herbin Bleu Azure. Bleu Azure. Trying to pronounce that with a French accent. And I'm putting it in my Le Bon Rosa Lilac. And this one, you know what, I was discussing with Katie that she sees this pen as a purple, which probably would have gone better with a Diamine Lilac Night. But to me, this pen looks blue-green, which is why I paired it with Herbin Bleu Azure. Oh my gosh. And I don't know, what do you guys think? Does this pen look green, blue, or purple to you? And then placing a drop here on the page. Now, I remember when I first swatched this ink a couple of months ago, I felt like it was light, like highlighter light. But I wanted to give it a try. Now, my Le Bon Rosa used to have a medium nib on it, but I had it ground down to a medium fine by Kirk Spear at the San Francisco Pen Show. And I like the nib width of it now, but I feel like it's still a little, or it's got a bit of scratchiness to it. Like it doesn't feel like outright like a nail, but it's not as smooth as it used to be. So I may need to work on that. Then placing a few drops of the Bleu Azure on my Hobonichi cousin and doing the sandwich paper bag method. And that's not a technical term, but I first saw this method through Clarissa's Instagram, the Snowy Studio, and she does this so well. Hers is so meticulous, and the way that she's able to combine all of these different colors on one page is just pure artistry, and she's just my inspiration for that. So then here I am painting some more florals. I am the worst at naming florals, so if you're going to ask me what these florals are, I have absolutely no idea. But really, for me, it's practicing my strokes, practicing the different angles of the florals, so that, you know, maybe one day I can actually paint this on watercolor paper and produce these as stickers. Who knows? But for me, it really is about experimenting with the different properties of the ink and experimenting with different ways I can use the paintbrush. I was okay with how this turned out, but I wish I had kind of planned the spacing of the florals better so it looked more like a bouquet rather than just random sprigs on my page. But overall, this ink in my Le Bon Rosa, it actually had a good flow to it for a Herbin ink, but I think what bothered me about this is that it was just maybe a little bit too light for me in this nib, but I think what affected my experience overall was that this nib wasn't as smooth as I had it originally, but you can see how light this is. And I think it's just that bit too light for me to be able to keep this for everyday use. Yeah, you can really see how light it is on that page. Well, that's Herbin Bleu Azure. Day 7, and we have Ink Institute Sea Bolts Lily, and this was a sample given to me at the Pelican Hub back in September, and I'm placing it in my Sailor Pro Gear White Rose Gold, and this has a 21K fine, no, medium fine nib, gosh. And because I couldn't fit the pen into the sample vial, I'm placing it in my ink miser. Highly recommend this, actually, because you are going to get to the point where you can't get to the bottom of an ink sample or an ink bottle, and you can just pour all of the ink into that ink miser, and you can fill any pen with that. So placing a drop there on my 30 inks 30 days grid and swirling it around with the ink sample vial. This is a beautiful, I would say corally orange, but it is a really nice orange. What you're going to see me experience though is that the nib on this Sailor Pro Gear, it just felt too dry with this ink. It wasn't the most enjoyable experience. And this particular pen, I purchased it 2 years ago, and while it is generally comfortable for me, I've kind of fallen out of love with the overall white rose gold finish. I am tempted to sell this pen, and I think this experience with this ink has kind of clinched it for me. But also, this particular pen, it does have a bit of staining in the grip section. So if I do sell it, that will end up being reflected in the selling price. But anyway, going back to this Ink Institute Siebold's Lily, it has beautiful shading, but I felt that this ink was just a little bit too dry, and combined with that Sailor Pro Gear medium fine 21 karat nib, not the best experience for me, unfortunately. But I do appreciate the color of this ink. So there I am painting some more florals, and gosh, my hair there is sticking out in the corner. I apologize for that. But this one, oh, I know what I'm painting here. I'm painting poppies, and I really enjoyed the process for painting these because the florals that I used to paint or started to paint a year ago, they were with a bigger paintbrush and they were bigger florals with bigger brush strokes, whereas this felt like it was putting that into a smaller scale with a smaller brush with smaller florals. And I really enjoyed the process for this one. It felt like I was more whimsical in my movements with the paintbrush, but it still came out as a really structured floral. So out of all the florals, funny enough, this was my favorite, even though this was not my favorite pen and ink combination for the week. And I don't know if you can see it here, but there is a bit of staining in that grip section. But again, this is one that unfortunately I will probably end up selling. I haven't sold it yet, but if anyone is interested, you know where to contact me. So this is Ink Institute Siebold's Lily and my Sailor Pro Gear. And you're going to see here that the ink is gorgeous. It is a really nice muted orange, but I didn't enjoy writing with it, unfortunately. And maybe it was the pen itself, I don't know. But it was to the point where I didn't enjoy writing with it, to the point that I didn't do 2 whole pages of writing. I stopped there. Oh boy. And finally, day 8, we have Ferris Wheel Press Green with Curiosity, another ink that I had received at the Pelican Hub. So I'm pouring that into the ink miser so it's easier for me to fill up my pen, which is the Hogtown pens in the taper medium model, and it is in the Turnt Pen Co. resin called On the Edge of Oopsie. That was a huge mouthful, gosh. And I'm placing a drop of that on the page here, and I'm really liking this ink. It's this gorgeous green that matches perfectly with this pen, which I actually have a fine architect nib on, but you'll see here, I'm going to do a close-up of this ink once it's dried, and you'll be able to see the shimmer and the sheen matches perfectly with this pen. So there I am writing it down to show you what it looks like in the writing sample, and the two together, it was great flow, and this architect nib is just so smooth and beautifully juicy. I really enjoyed writing with this, and I love a good architect nib, and this one was lovely. Now, swatching with it in my journal, gorgeous color, and it really showed off the shimmer and the sheen. However, you're going to see this in a little bit here. The shimmer isn't as prominent as the sheen. The sheen seems to take over the writing sample and even a little bit in the painting of the leaves here. So in this one, I decided to do a different type of leaf practice and playing around with the saturation. So when I say play around with the saturation, I will dip my brush in the ink and then add a little bit of water to it to lighten it up so that you get the different lightness, I guess, different shading of the ink. And I actually really enjoyed painting with this, but with the painting, when you add water to it, you don't really get the sheening or the shimmer in it, but you do get a lot of the sheen in the writing sample, as you'll see here shortly. I did enjoy, though, writing with the Architect nib with this ink. I wasn't sure if this Architect nib would either have hard starts or get clogged, but it actually worked really well, the two together. It was a smooth writing experience. And one thing about this ink, though, is that you'll see here there is a lot of sheen, and I really wanted that blue shimmer to stand out in the writing sample. But here in the writing sample, most of what stands out is that sheen. I don't see as much shimmer, unfortunately, and that fact in itself has deterred me from buying a bottle, because I don't necessarily want an ink that is just sheen. I really wanted that blue shimmer to come out, and unfortunately it didn't. But still, a beautiful combination.
So there are days 1 through 8 of 30 Inks 30 days, and I am still working to catch up. It's actually November 11th as I'm finishing this, and I'm a little bit behind. So this version of 30 Inks 30 days is proving a little bit more stressful than the previous versions of this, but I still am trying to enjoy the process. Now, my favorite combination, what do you think it was? I don't know. I actually really liked the Narwhal Nautilus with the Diamine Lilac Night, but I also really loved the Pelican M800 Brown Black with the Anderillium Tollite Moth Warm. So, those were both my favorites. My least favorite this whole week was Ink Institute Seabold's Lily with the Sailor Pro Gear White Rose Gold, to the point where I will probably sell this. It's hard to say that, but it's gotten to the point where I may be at the selling point of that. Which one was your favorite out of all of these? Let me know down in the comments below. Once again, thank you guys so much for joining me for part 1 of 30 Inks 30 days, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great day.